Okay, so now we've got to 100 subscribers on the Thoth TV YouTube channel. Why not discuss some slightly more personal things? Okay, so I figured what might be quite nice is to discuss the topic of practicing in secret. Now, the reason for that is because it is something that does come up normally amongst younger people. So younger people that ask us about witchcraft and about practice and stuff like that. What's quite important to them is that they're able to practice in secret. Now, I know that witchcraft has a bad reputation and is often seen quite negatively. And I'm not one of those people that says that's always a bad thing, because actually, contrary to popular neo-pagan belief, there are a lot of bad witches out there. There are a lot of people that do very nasty and horrible, disgusting, deplorable things. Vile practices. They are witches. There are witches out there that do some terrible, that have very terrible, disgusting magical practices, okay? So I'm not gonna say that witchcraft is some lovey-dovey love and light thing, because it really isn't. Maybe for some people, but not for everyone. So because obviously there are people out there who do want to learn witchcraft but are a little bit unsure as to what they're doing, but also other people that are finding out. So I don't recommend you do any of the terrible abhorrent practices that I kind of alluded to. But even if you are practicing something super simple, you know, even if it's just general spell work or even researching the topics, that kind of a thing, people still won't like it. Now, from my personal, and I'll go from my personal experience with growing up as a witch and as a magical practitioner, I came from a household whereby it's considered split. So basically, my mum and my dad were never really together. So I'd spend half of the time in my dad's house, half the time in my mum's house. And my mum's what I suppose you'd call an atheist, doesn't really believe in anything unless she actually sees it, but doesn't want to see it. So she's got no interest in going out there and kind of researching topics like this. In fact, if anything spooky or weird was to happen, she'd kind of say, I'm just going to ignore that, and, you know, la 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 sort of thing. On my dad's side of the family, or my dad's kind of staying with my dad, was very different, because he's a fundamentalist Christian. So him and my stepmom are very, very hardcore Christians. So they're the thou shalt not suffer a witch to live type. Because of that, I thought that it's probably not such a good idea to be practicing any form of magic that's really recognizable. So when you see 101 books on witchcraft and magic, and they all tell you to get a cauldron and that you need to do the elements and light candles and that kind of thing. Well, let's be fair. If you walk in on some kid, say it's your kid, as a Christian, and you see them lighting candles, talking weird magical gobbledygook over those candles with a pentagram on the floor, what are you gonna think? Okay, now that kind of screams stereotypical witchcraft, doesn't it? So when it comes to practicing in secret and really getting a hold on witchcraft, I think the problem is that beginners often see it as the aesthetic. So witchcraft comes with an aesthetic, whether it's wearing a lot of black, whether it's pentagrams and that kind of symbolism of daggers and cloaks and cauldrons and that kind of thing. Well, sorry to break it to you, but not all witches actually practice that way. In fact, a lot of witches have moved with the times. Rather than using a cauldron to brew your potions, they use slow cookers and things like that, okay? I know that in things such as Harry Potter, it's very popular to kind of look at the kind of wands and tools and magical books, grimoires, leather bound, you know, with strange writing and that kind of thing, the old Book of Shadow stuff. But actually, none of that's really practical. if you're trying to keep your magical practices a secret. If you're trying to keep your magical practice a secret, the best thing you can do is keep as much of it as possible up here and use the most blandest of tools, okay? So really that's gonna depend on what kind of culture you're from, how old you are, you know. Okay, for a, say, 14-year-old, it might be a little bit weird for a 14-year-old out of nowhere to buy things like a pestle and mortar, loads of jars of herbs and stuff like that, putting on shelves in their bedroom, that kind of thing. That's a little bit weird, okay? However, if you're, say, in your early 20s and that, and you've moved out and you're into your kind of cooking and that kind of thing, going in and looking at a nicely presented cupboard in the kitchen full of jars of herbs and stuff with a pestle and mortar next to it, that doesn't look so weird. That looks like they're into cooking, okay? Now the thing with witchcraft that I cannot stress enough is the fact that it's highly practical. And when you look at magic and magical practitioners in terms of the different types, you can kind of categorize them from culture and also from class to a certain extent. So if you're talking about location, you're talking witchcraft as being European magical practices of the plebs, essentially, of the poor people. When you look back over the past 1,000 or so years, if you were rich and you were from the upper echelons of society, you would more likely be classed as a magician, and your magic would more likely come with a kind of ceremonial type ritualistic flair to it. All of these things like swords and robes and stuff like that are quite prevalent in ceremonial magic. And ceremonial magic, when you look back at it, is very much the magic of the court, kings, queens, you know, that kind of thing. It takes money to work with these kind of tools. Now, the everyday village witch, which is really where witchcraft kind of stems from, it stems from the people, the everyday people. Nowadays in the UK, which is where I live, even if you don't have a huge amount of money, you still have a roof over your head, you still have electricity, you still have a kitchen, you know, oven, that kind of a thing. You still have access to the NHS, doctors, you still have access to the police, all those kind of things. If you're going back even 100 to 200 years ago, there wasn't really an NHS. There was no National Health Service. You couldn't really afford a doctor, okay? Unless you were kind of in the middle class bracket. And, you know, in terms of access to what you'd have, you wouldn't have a lot of money. You were really just trying to survive. So really all you'd be using in terms of your magical practice is things that grows on your doorstep, things that you can get a hold of from your doorstep. So when you look back, particularly at the cunning folk, we are doing a series on cunning folk. If you don't know what that is, then check out the cunning folk playlist on FOF TV YouTube channel. But basically, when you're thinking about using these items, it is literally all of the stuff that they would use would be stuff that you would have every day, okay? Now, the problem is that at some point, witchcraft kind of got very romanticized, and it almost appears like it was stuck in a time loop, stuck. So whereas we think of witches and that using cauldrons and things, back in the day when witches were using cauldrons and things, it was because everyone was using cauldrons and things. You know, the Iron Age where you would use a cauldron because everyone had a cauldron because that's what you'd cook in. That's the reason why the witch used it, okay? Now, we kind of think of witches as being stuck in backwards in time, you know, from like medieval period, maybe just after. But in reality, witches do move with the times and they do adopt new technology if it makes their practices easier, which that's kind of what it's all about. Tools are there like stabilizers on a bike to make your practice easier. What you're gonna encounter though is the romanticized view and aesthetic of witchcraft, which if you make something in a cauldron, such as a potion, I don't know why you say it's a love potion, you make that in a cauldron, and you make that, or you make it in a slow cooker, or whatever on the hob. Those are all going to work the same. Just because it's in a cauldron doesn't mean that it's any less witchy. Ultimately, again, witchcraft, practical, all that matters is that it works. So all of these things that you need to think about is you need to think about, if you're using a tool, do you actually need that tool? What does that tool do? Now, from the perspective of a lot of books and things like that, which is where if you don't have a mentor, often that's where people go from. They try to research things on the internet, YouTube videos, that kind of thing nowadays, and all you tend to get is kind of recipes. They're almost like recipe books. Get this tool, get that tool, get this ingredient, get that ingredient, and then mix it all together, and this is what happens. Really, what you need to start studying is really what the use of the tools are. So why are you using a cauldron? Well, a cauldron is something physically that you use to put ingredients into. So why can't you just use a glass bowl from the kitchen? There is symbology in certain types of witchcraft, such as Wicca, where there's a high kind of, is seen as kind of the womb, the cauldron and all that kind of thing. But we're not going to go into too much detail with that, because that's a very specific path. And at the end of the day, very often people will they will divorce the magical and the mundane. And that is something witches have never really done. If I'm really honest with you, back in the day, everyone practiced some sort of magical practice, you know, maybe not to a high level, but everyone, that's where folklore comes from, for crying out loud. You know, it was a case of, you're not going to be getting all these weird implements, okay? Okay, in ceremonial magic, that might not always be true, but when it comes to actual witchcraft, you are looking at the fact that it's everyday objects around the house that you're using, or things that you can go and pick up. So when it comes to spells and things like that, what you need to be thinking about is how a spell actually works. What you don't want to be doing is buying a spell book, because spell books are a load of crap. And, you know, I suppose putting together little witchy kits and altar kits and that kind of thing. You don't need to create a permanent altar. Okay, what is an altar at the end of the day? A working, you know, because it's used for a couple of different reasons. A working space, a portal. I keep saying porthole, but portal, doorway essentially. For you to work with energy, manipulate energy, or energy to come through that portal. So, you know, whether it's a deity, that kind of thing, spirit, you know, whether you've got an ancestral altar or what. Well, you need to remember that that thing doesn't need to be there on show. If you are going to use an altar, you can pack it away. You know, if you are going to have an altar on show, for example, an altar of the dead is quite popular all around the world. In some places, you know, you can look at it from a cultural perspective. So when you go over to China, for example, and they've got kind of the family shrine with all of the family names and that kind of a thing on it, essentially an ancestral altar. If you look over here and you look at the stereotypical pentagram t-shirt wearing witch, they might have the kind of candles and it will look a little bit dark, that kind of thing. But at the same time, remember what you're actually using it for. It doesn't need to look like that. It doesn't need to have the witchy aesthetic. If you're looking to create a portal where you can leave offerings, for example, for spirits or that kind of thing, A, does it need to be in the house? B, does it need to be permanent? And C, does it need to look witchy? So if you did want something in the house, instead of having this thing with loads of candles and weird stuff all over it, just have a nice little side table where you might have a few pictures of dead relatives and some flowers. You know, it's kind of like that can be used as a portal. If you are going to go through a more ritualistic kind of approach, then all of that stuff can be put away. But it doesn't mean having necessarily a box like this full of, or cabinet full of witchy stuff, which if someone was to open that cabinet, you've got all sorts of weird stuff in. It doesn't need to be like that. A lot of the time, because of the world in which we live in nowadays, particularly in the West, is very commercialized. You know, we live in a kind of commercialized society where it's all about buying and keeping stuff, you know, retail therapy and all that kind of a thing. The only reason we keep stuff in stock is because we get through such a vast amount of quantity of it, being that we run a witchcraft shop and that we see clients and such on a regular basis. So we're having to keep stuff in stock. Now, witches in general, you would work with the energy that's present. So whether that would be moon phases, because to work with the moon, let's be fair, you don't need to start setting up moon altars and stuff like that. The moon's in the sky every night. You can just utilize that, feel the energy. Really, I think what we're talking about, the difficult part, is the tools. Because at the end of the day, you use and learn tools to master an art. So, you know, think about tarot, for example. If you're trying to develop psychic ability and that kind of thing, then tarots are quite a popular one. Now, that, of course, means that in order to learn tarot, you might need a tarot deck. Well, for one, why are you learning tarot in the first place if you don't have any tarot cards or aren't allowed to keep any tarot cards? This isn't going to be a video where I say to hide things under your bed or that kind of a thing, although I will share a little story about that at some point. It's really a case of how can you change your practice to blend in with your surroundings at the end of the day. When you're doing a spell, do you need to order crystals on the internet, or can you go out and find a rock because you're going out for a walk around the park? Now, a big problem that came in the 20th century was this whole correspondence thing. That's another real problem. The correspondence thing of getting books, I've probably got loads of them over there, full of, well, this crystal's for that and that herb's for this and blah, 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 blah. If you have to look up in a book what to use that ingredient for, you don't understand how to use that ingredient, which is why I don't like spell books, of course, because with spell books, of course, it's recipes. It's a case of someone else is created this spell and the person that's reading it is just following a recipe without really understanding any of the flavors or what they add. Now, you can liken creating spells and things like that to cooking. You know, if a chef knows their ingredients, they know that this added with this gives this kind of a flavor. They understand the ingredients. A cook, on the other hand, just warms up a meal that's been prepared by someone else. And if you go to Tesco's or Walmart or Asda or wherever it is and go and buy one of those ready meals, you're not cooking, you're warming up a pre-prepared meal full of crap. And it's never as nutritious as doing proper cooking yourself. And do you know what? Using someone else's spell is never as good as writing your own if you know how spells work. Now, obviously, if you've come to this on the first time, please do explore the thothwitchcraft.com website. There's lots of resources there, and the YouTube channel, because we do break down a lot of things that might help with this. I'm not expecting to teach witchcraft in one little 20-minute video. So, you know, it's going to be difficult, but I think that really the takeaway from this is if you're practicing in secret, the whole point is to blend in with your surroundings. And what you shouldn't be doing is asking yourself, how can I hide this cauldron? Where can I hide my tarot cards? It's what can I use that's already in this vicinity, or that blends in with this vicinity, or this, you know, room that I'm in, or house, or culture, whatever, that can do the same thing. Okay, so if your parents open up your desk drawer and find a pack of tarot cards, they might think, oh, what's all this kind of that you're doing, all this evil stuff. However, if they open up and find a pack of playing cards, you know, what about that? If they open up and find a sketchbook where you've drawn things, and it just so happens to be one of those sketchbooks where you can take the pages out and then slot them back in, that you can jumble them up, a little bit more difficult, a little bit more weird. It's kind of a little bit more, oh, they're just drawing kind of thing. So yeah, stop thinking about the aesthetic, because the aesthetic is a danger. And if you're drawn to the aesthetic, you should not be on this channel, because this channel is about learning and teaching and practicing magic, not looking as if you are. But enough about that. So hopefully you enjoyed this video. Before I go, I will just probably share one of the things that that really helped me, which was really talking about when it came to helping with psychic development. And that was the fact that using and working with psychic development and that kind of a thing, people automatically go with tarot and that kind of thing. Well, the more magic you practice, the more, when it comes to spell work, energy that you are sensing and manipulating, the more your palette will build up. It's a bit like taste buds. The more you're used to working with different ingredients, the more you'll be able to taste those ingredients within a recipe, within a spell, within an environment, that kind of a thing. So when it comes to that, what I suggest you do is start looking at, when it comes to psychic development, not using all of these tools such as tarot. If you can't get hold of them, use other things. Now we will be doing a whole probably video series on psychic development, but at the moment, if you're interested in tarot, we have an entire tarot course on our YouTube channel for free. Just go on the playlist and it's Learn Tarot playlist. There's about 20 odd videos teaching you how to read cards and stuff. When it comes to other things outside of that, then we will be adding to, you know, various different playlists and little mini courses and stuff like that on the website. So please do bear with us. But again, remember, the aesthetic is not the craft, and you don't need the aesthetic to practice the craft. In fact, most people move past it very quickly. Anyway, thanks for watching.